Okay, let's work on the second session for this Rick Grimes painting. Excuse me. So I have, so here we go again. I have the same palette that I had for the first session, and it's been nearly a week since I've worked on this painting. I've been doing some improvements to my studio and a bunch of other things, working on other stuff. But I have this palette. I have a bunch of these little palettes that I work with, one for each painting. And now my cat is meowing at me. But anyway, so what happened is the paints have skinned over. So some of the paint is dry on the surface here. Some of it isn't. Some of it's pretty wet. So what I do is I just take a palette knife. You can use any palette knife. I have a bunch of them over here. And just deskin them. Just peel that off. If you want to, you can throw this away and just get new paint out. If you want to throw away perfectly good paint, you're more than welcome to do that. So let's just do that. Let's move around the canvas here. And what we don't want is we don't want this dried skin getting into our paint as we mix it up on our palette, mix our colors, and you end up with weird little chunks of goobers in your painting. And it can be annoying. It can look kind of crappy. If looking kind of crappy is what you're going for, then by all means do that. But as you can see, it just turns into kind of a mess. If you have a small amount of paint to do this to, it might just be best to scrape it off and put some like this right here. I have this yellow ochre. I'm probably just going to scrape that off and then just put a new dab of paint on there. Same with the raw umber. There's probably not enough paint to really worry about trying to squeeze a little bit. The raw umber. Looks like I can get most of that skin off right there. I have a little garbage can next to my easel that I put a, refuse in. Like I'll put on these little dabs of paint skin in there. And also wipe them off into a paper cotton cloth or something. Some of these pigments, they don't skin over too much. Like this alizarin crimson. Raw sienna skinned over. And this can just be a little moment of relaxation too. Like, not in a big hurry. Just gonna play around with this paint, get it all cleaned up. Get ready for our little session here. So that cadmium red light is good to go. Naples yellow, good to go. All right. Okay. We get some yellow. All right. Little yellow ochre. Let me get some burnt and raw umber here. Some burnt umber. Gotta decide what we're going to start with today. I think I might start with working on some of the features, like his eyes, maybe his nose, his mouth, and then work my way out from there. The first thing I'm probably going to do is a little coating on my painting of my medium so that I'm working more into a wet on wet situation. To do that, I will grab cleaned up 1-inch house painting brush. Now, if you go to your hardware store and get these, you get the more expensive kind, the kind that will hold more paint. They hold lots of paint. They hold their shape really well, except for this little doggy right here. Just break that off. And they work good for covering in areas for blocking. And I think I use a brush like this to block in the background. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my medium here, which is a mixture of linseed oil and liquid, and sometimes I don't really mix this together. I like the liquid or the linseed oil sit on top a bit. So to do that, I'm gonna get some linseed oil. Now the liquid helps dry quicker. You want to be careful about using too much of it into your paint because it tends to dry with a yellowish tint. And if you put a big thick layer of this onto your canvas, it will dry with a yellow coating, and it might not look very good, especially if you have a lighter, more like grayish or bluish area. You don't want this sort of yellow blob on things, but this will help to kind of make the painting look like it's wet again. Well, it is wet. It's just a clear. I'm using the linseed oil here. The linseed oil will dry a lot slower, but as we mix, we paint on top of this and into it, it tends to mix with the paint, and if you're painting thin, it'll dry fairly quickly. Like it'll mostly, this is a really thin coat, just enough to get the whole painting wet. Like I don't want it running and dripping on this. You'll have too much of a wet surface, then your paint will just sort of smear around instead of adhering to the surface of the canvas. So if you get too much on, you can take your rag and wipe it off. Just want enough to kind of keep the paint looking wet. So, all right. Where to start? Let's see here. I'm just going to start with his ear because I haven't really covered that part of the canvas with the paint yet, and it'll give us somewhere to begin. I'm going to mix up. Try to remember what I was mixing with the other day. Start with some yellow ochre, some of this darker gray, Portland gray deep. And it's probably not going to work quite right. So just mix in a little bit of burnt sienna with that. I'm going to keep on adding some of this yellow ochre and burnt sienna until I get to a tone that I think is going to look pretty close. Not quite right. Let's go ahead and paint this in, right? It's not quite right at all. So I'm going to pick up some Naples yellow and go right more directly into this yellow. I want more of this lighter yellow color. All right. Looks a little bit better. I'm going to pick up some cadmium red light and warm it up a bit. So there's quite a bit of blood in the earlobes and whatnot. Looks like I have that somewhat of a tone in his neck right there. I want to continue that color. Loosely block it in for now. Like so. And I'm using a flat brush. So I've just squeezed out some of the paint in here. It makes it a little flatter. And as you can see, it has broad edge and a straight edge, and that allows me to make some really nice flat marks and then a sharp angle. It's almost like a calligraphy. I can, with one stroke, go from fat to thin by rotating the brush around as I move. So if I want to create a sort of swooping move that doesn't have a continuous one stroke, I can rotate the brush around and create a different, with one brush movement, I can create a stroke that is more complicated. Try to show you what I mean here. So let's get some of this warmer tone. I'm going to mix the cadmium red light, burnt sienna. I'm going to pull in some of this grayer texture I mixed to begin with. It's going to create a fleshier tone, I think. And what I mean by changing this brush might be a little bit too thick for this area. But let's see. So something like that. And with that, you can create a little nicer. Without having to go in and noodle a bunch of stuff around, you can do it with one stroke. And I find there's always something sort of satisfying about doing that. I'm going to pull some burnt umber over here. It's going to darken this tone up while still maintaining this warmth. And going to continue to make marks that are ear-like. Oops. So we can get that with one stroke. So I'm also holding the brush a bunch of different ways. There's no real way to do it. Sometimes I hold it like this to draw something in. Sometimes I'll hold it like this with four fingers on one side to move around. I'm not necessarily doing this in my wrist all the time. Like if I want to get a good movement, I'm moving my entire arm, which you can't see in these camera angles, but I'm moving from my shoulder all the way around rather than getting in here and trying to lay in detail. So this will keep your wrist from getting sore if you're doing a lot of detail work. It also keeps you from getting too caught up in a lot of really minute things. I just find it more comfortable, I think. I don't know if this is something I was taught to do or not. I can't really remember, but it's one holding my brush in ways that make it easier to put down the marks we're trying to make here. Let's see here. I want to darken that up a little bit. So too light. And as we can see, I'm getting caught up in like little minutia of his ear already, which is not necessarily what I wanted to do, but as I kind of work into the groove of this painting today or this session, it'll start loosening up and I'll start making broader movements, and it just takes a little bit to get into that, find that little sweet spot. And now that I got that, I can go and hit some of these highlights, and I'm going to use, like I did over here earlier, I'm going to use more of a grayish tone. I'm going to start with this Portland gray medium. That might maybe a little mixture of these two Portland grays. Here, I'm going to mix it back into this yellow ochre tone I have. I think I'm going to go a little bit more on the Portland gray light. Now, if you don't want to buy these pre-mixed colors, I like these because they're very neutral. They don't have not really on the warm or cool side. They're pretty neutral. You can get them black and white and pre-mix these. If that's what you prefer to do. That's probably too bright. Going to knock that down a bit. Let's see how this works. All right. Then I'm basically just kind of hitting where the highlights, some of the highlights of his ear are. Let's not get too caught up in this quite yet. I mean, I think his ear is the focus of this whole thing. But like I said, this is getting us loosened up a bit, warmed up as we work into the painting. All right. Let me see. What do I want to do? I'm going to start working into his eyes, I think, and grab my junk over here. Okay. move the thing around work. Because I wasn't smart enough to set all this up before I started recording. But since this isn't live, I maybe I'll edit this. Who knows? There. All right, so I'm going to go into here and I'm going to solidify some of these tones here. I want it to be a little bit darker than the rest of his face, not a whole lot. Let's see what I can figure out. Let's keep this burnt umber. Let's mix in some raw burnt sienna. Bring in some cadmium red light. That might be a little too warm. Yeah, it's really warm. So I'm going to go back into this indigo blue, which is going to do a couple things. It's going to darken it up a bit. It's also going to cool it down, and it's going to gray it up. So it's changing this color several different ways that I think is going to work better. Yeah, that's more it right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in the edge of this little mixture right here, I'm going to modulate this mixture by bringing in some of this cadmium red light. So what I have is this graduated, modulated tone. They're all sort of related. They're all just like stepped back and forth. And then I can go back into my palette and pull and mix different, little tweaks on the color, but I don't like it. So I'm going to pull down that a bit. I want to, okay, so I'm going to pull this color up into his eyebrow here. I'm going to use a little bit of raw umber to grade up. So I can use earth tones or these neutral grays to deaden the color a bit. What I mean by deaden is to knock down the intensity of the chromatic value or the luminosity of the color. And what we're most concerned with is the value structures here. What I mean by the value structure is how like dark it is from like white to black, the grayish tones. And I'm going to shift this over to a raw umber and yellow ochre mixture. So I go up his forehead right here. And I might just pop in some yellow ochre and mix it in on the painting to see how that tone works. That looks all right. All right, I think I have I'm working with too small of a brush up here. I want to loosen this up. I'm going to move into a slightly bigger brush, and I'm going to keep working across his forehead, I think. It's not quite dark enough. more yellow ochre, more raw umber. Sticking with real basic earth tones here. I want kind of a smooth transition across his forehead. I'm going to want to hit more of a, start hitting a green tone up here. So what I might do is actually, it seems to be an overall green tone. So I'm going to, let's do this before I get another color on my palette. Let's mix some yellow ochre with indigo blue, and I'm going to dial that down with Naples yellow, so it's a little lighter. And I'm going to keep shifting that. It looks like it's too light. And so the purpose of the brushwork I'm doing here is trying to describe the shape of his forehead. And I'm pushing and pulling it in a couple different directions. In my references that I'm looking at, he's got a hair coming down over his forehead, so it becomes a little more obscured and hard to see what's going on. And I'm going to add that hair later on to what I'm doing here. I'm not going to focus on those things that are more detail things. I'm coming in here with the corner of my brush to kind of carve out the shapes around his eyes. Not sure how I like that. Let's move back to this cadmium red light a bit. Just mix in some yellow ochre with that. I think that's going to look a little bit better. So I think part of the problem I'm having is that I'm trying to match my reference a little too much. So I'm just going to keep playing that tone till it looks right. I'm going to go back to a smaller brush. And I'm going to pick up this tone that I used up here, and I'm going to start working it in other parts of this painting here. He's probably a little bit too bright, a little more subtle. So how I do that is I mix it back into a color that's similar to these colors that I have on my palette here. And then there's highlights on his nose, and I'm going to try to use this brush to describe the planar structures of his nose. Like that. And then go back into this brighter color. There's a little highlight that's kind of like a little triangle right there. This comes up like that. Then I'm going to take a little darker tone and hit where his cheek is. So this is, kind of I'm drawing in shape. So I have the basic color on the foundation, and then like as if I was drawing with a pen, I can come in and scribe in some of these things that are more like drawing. And as you can see, I made a very, like a kind of a curving stroke right there. So I'm like using a pencil or a pen. This is more like using a calligraphy thing, even though I I don't do calligraphy. I suck at lettering and such. Find it much easier to paint faces than to write letters or draw and paint letters. Mechanical things are very difficult. You know, if you don't get them mechanical, they obviously look wrong. You need to get those exactly right, or they're obviously wrong. And so I hate doing those things. I avoid it. Although a lot of the paintings I have with like guns or trains, they have very mechanical things. So I do some things as challenges, but I hate lettering. That's what computers were invented for. Remember when I was in school, we had a lettering class, and even this was like 1994. It was one of our foundation classes, and even then it was obsolete. I absolutely hated that class. Probably hated it because I wasn't any good at it, and I didn't see the point in it. I guess the same thing could be considered with oil painting too. There's you can use computers to make all this stuff. But I actually like doing this. And if you're doing digital art, the same sort of principles will work for that too. Creating, shaping on the, below, and then working your way up to to details. So probably, I mean, I've done some digital artwork at an iPad recently. I've done some Procreate stuff, and I find it frustrating really to do digital art mostly because I can't switch my brushes around quite as easily. There's lots of things you can't, at least I haven't found an efficient way to do it, that I can do with traditional mediums. Probably like that. It's like, I don't still have a clamshell cell phone, but I wasn't the first one to get a smartphone either. I'll be working on more digital stuff. I actually been using some digital techniques to help figure out and solve problems in paintings. I'll take a photo of a painting that I'm not sure where to go with it, and then I'll do some digital work on top of it, and kind of create a working idea of what to do with it, next. All right, let's keep working these gray over to this bluish tone. So this bluish tone has some of those colors that are in the background, and what you're going to find is that there's the light that's creating this color in the background is going to reflect and show up in the skin. And if you can incorporate those tones into the painting, it will make sense. It also looks really nice next to these reddish pinkish tones. These colors will look more green, and that will make these look more orange, and those things will look really nice together. That's the complementary color of reddish and green. So if anything next to this color is going to by nature look more greenish, even if it's on the blue side, or even if it was just a neutral gray. And then so we're contrasting those tones right there. And I'm going to continue to pull these tones down off of his nose and around his face here. Like so. Not sure this is looking much like written crimes. Let's work on his beard. So I'm going to have to meld this into this tone. This tone isn't really all that gray. So let's see. Let's start with scumbling in some of this right here. Just going to rough in some paint over the top of this. It's got a really scraggly beard. It's kind of light areas. So I'm going to lighten this up in some areas and let some of the darker areas show through. I'm going to use brush strokes that are in the direction that his beard hair is going. Like something like that. Let's see. He has little specks of highlights in here. It looks like the hair on his neck. Let's actually pull some of this. Looks like I had this indigo blue and cadmium red light burnt sienna mixture. I'm going to pull that over into this bluish gray tone I have over here. I don't know if I got that right or not. It's probably too light. So I'm going to pull in some raw umber. Go. And I'm going to continue to pull this shape into his beard. And it's going to look lighter. So it's going to look much brighter over here compared to these dark tones than it does right here, because this tone right here is pretty light. So the same tone is going to look brighter. It's going to look like a highlight, like a rim light on his beard and such. That. And you can see a problem I have with the shape of his mouth. I have kind of the right thing going here, but it's not in there right. I'm going to try to fix that. I'm going to pull some alizarin crimson out. I might use some. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this indigo blue mixture with it. And there's a relationship with his mouth and his nose right here that I think this is going to go. I might pull a smaller brush out here in a second. Let's get a smaller. All right. I'm going to move over this raw sienna. Just like that. And often the shape between lips will help define the likeness a little bit better. Like, I don't so much focus on the top and bottom lip, or I focus on the line between the lips and probably the shadow that's underneath this lower lip. So, like when I'm drawing faces with pencil or whatever, that's usually the marks that I'll focus on rather than trying to draw the outlines of his mouth or his lips. And then I'm going to bring this, mix in this color. I'm going to mix in some cadmium red light into this mixture to warm up a bit. Looks like that's going to work. And I'm going to push and then pull it up to create a thinner mark right there. And now this part of his other part of his lip, his upper lip, has got a bit of a light on it. So the light source is coming from this direction right here. So it's going to be not quite as bright as this highlight on his bottom lip, but it's going to be brighter than this. And I think what I'm going to do is take a tone that's not necessarily a lot lighter, but maybe just a bit grayer than that tone. So I'm going to go to this Portland Gray Medium, which is a little bit lighter than the actual tone, so I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. And let's see, it's going to be a sharp point and fatter right there. And now this highlight right here is his bottom lip is going to move over. I'm going to paint in his bottom lip a little bit more first. Some of this cadmium red light. It might be a good idea to get another red out because cadmium red light's really orangish. I'm going to stick with it though. See if I can pull this out. Might redden it up with some of this alizarin crimson and lighten it up with this Naples yellow, just a touch of it. That's way too light. That's way too cold and purpley. This might be way too warm. So let's see, I'm going to pull in some raw umber to gray it down and cool it down a little bit. Let's see if that works. Okay, so corner of his mouth is right about there. Just going to pull that across. So looks pretty bad. I'm going to have to change his chin. There is a bit of a highlight next to the corner of his mouth, which is like not his lip, but where his lip meets, I don't know, his face. And it's going to be sort of like this color in here. And it's going to help define his mouth by defining the corner of his lip. That's probably too bright. I'm going to mix in with this little bit of this gray color. Oops, it's too much pinkish right there. And we're seeing a lot. So I don't think this is too light. I think his beard is too dark. And we'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to work on this side of his lip right here. And I'm going to take this color, which I mixed for this right here, and I'm going to mix it into this gray color. What's happening is some of the reflected light from the whatever this background color is reflecting off the top of his lower lip over here. I might even push that a little bit more. Like that. Now I'm going to hit up the highlight over here, and I'm going to pull this, looks like it's the indigo bluish color with this Naples yellow. We'll see if that works. It's all right. I think I want to fill out some of this lower lip a little bit more. So as this rounds out, it gets the light differently and it gets a little darker down here. And I'm just going to play around with a couple of colors, maybe this That's probably not going to work right there. It's too blue. I mean, so what it does is it turns it to gray. I want a little more saturation in there. I'm going to mix some cadmium red light and alizarin crimson here. I'm not quite sure I like that. Let me pull in some more burnt umber, see if that makes a difference. All right, a little better. Don't be surprised if I later on just completely redo this. We're making our best guess at the moment. And the more and more I find a groove for this painting, the more bold the decisions are making. I'm kind of not just really attacking this painting right now. One, I'm trying to explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it, which makes me slow down it makes me think about it a lot more. I tend to make better paintings when I quit thinking about what I'm doing. Here, I'm gonna get a different painting rag here. I'm gonna just start working with this raw umber. I think I'm gonna need a little more of that color. It's a little darker. I'm going to start pulling in some of his beard, mustache area to help define his lip. Like that. Let's see. So I have this mixture of colors over here that are going to predominantly be his beard colors. And I'm using a small round brush, number 2, I think, to scumble in beard-like marks, stuff that looks like facial hair. And think about like cross hatching yours. So I gotta do a couple things with this. This has got to both look like facial hair and it's got to look like facial hair on a surface. So the same rules of describing the contours of a surface and modeling form apply. You're just doing it with a texture rather than a solid surface. So the hair's got to do 2 things. It's got to look like hair, and it's got to look like it's hair on a face. And the face has got to describe a form in 3 dimensions. So this is one of the instances, instead of doing like a really simple one flat stroke, you can do that to a certain point to describe facial hair. And so that's what we did to begin with. I had a lot of the stuff blocked in, and I blocked it in a little darker. And now I'm going over it with lighter tones. That's kind of a classical way of working to build up a sense of light on a form, is to work lights on top of darks. If you use colored pencils, you'll notice that pretty quickly. What'll happen is if you try to darken things with a colored pencil over a flatter tone, it looks dirty. Rather than putting a darker undertone and then working up lighter tones on top of it, which generally doesn't look, it looks like light coming out of the dark. And I'm going to work this tone into this. All right, I want to work on his eye a bit, I think. I also like work standing up. Um, I tell my back hurts, I guess, but the reason for that is it allows me to step back really quick. Step back and look to see if it's looking good as a whole before I step back in and get into a small area like his eye. And I can see the whole thing, and then I can see if anything's really jumping out is not working correctly. Like I think what I'm going to end up having to do is change his mouth some more and bringing this over here a little bit. But before I do that, let's just jump into his eye a bit. Once I get to a certain stage where I feel like things are kind of all in the right place and it's down to minor things, then I might lower the easel and sit down and do it, do more works as I'm sitting. But I would recommend if you have the space and the ability to stand up while you're working, you can just try it out. All right. I think I want his eyelids got to curve this way a little more. Um, I'm going to go into his eye a little bit. Actually, just paint that pupil in there a little bit. And then I'm going to take this mixture over here. That might actually, I'm gonna go over it here. It's a little darker. So this is not as bright as it might appear. I don't know if I have enough paint on my brush for that. I'm gonna change. I'm gonna just this eye is round, so it's got to, and we're looking at it at an angle. So ultimately, it's got to look like a round eye. There we go. And I'm going to continue to paint into these little shadow areas of his eye. Uh, I'm going to work up some of these cooler tones that I had up here. And that's going to come right up into that part of his eye right there. So these brush strokes, when you're painting on the eye, should describe the form of the eye. All right. And is that working? I don't know. I can't tell. There is some reflected light under his eyebrow here, and it's reflecting off of his skin, so I'm going to use a warmer tone right here. That. All right, let's do some things here. I'm just gonna highlight on his eye over here. Just spot right there. And one of the cool things about painting is like what we're doing here is like really getting into and describing everything. Like some of the cool things about making paintings is seeing what you can get away with. Like how simple can you make it? Like it reads as an eye, and you get up close. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4 brush strokes, like 2 little gray colors, a dark color, and a little light blue. It kind of falls apart. And I think that's a lot of fun when you can do that on a painting. It just starts pulling things together. That you know, it's almost like you're tricking the eye into jumping to conclusions. So you don't have to paint in every last little detail. You can really have fun and try to indicate things without giving the whole show away. And so I'm going to do some of that right on the side of his face. One thing that does is if you have areas that just kind of fall apart into really abstractions and simple brushwork, and then you have areas that are really focused in, what it does is it helps the viewer's eye to zoom around into what's in focus and not really pay so much attention to the things that aren't in focus, because it shows you it leads the eye to the detail. The eye will wander around until it finds more things to sort of lock onto. I'm gonna get another little angle right here, though. You got an issue right here, though. So this is kind of competing with that side of his mouth, and it shouldn't. So I'm going to darken that up a bit, maybe. Then we have little highlights on his lip. I'm going to do that with a grayish tone. It's going to be a lot of reflected light from the environment, maybe a little bit of light from the hard light that's coming from the right-hand side. But you don't want a bunch of weird marks obscuring the shape. So this should help to define the shape of his mouth ultimately. Okay, I think I know what I need to do. I need to lighten this tone right here. So what's happening here is this is so bright, and it's also really contrasted. I'm gonna lighten this area up. There's a little bit of skin tone right next to the side of the lip, just like there is right here. And I think if I lighten that up, and I need to put a darker tone under his lip to show that there's a shadow under his lip. So we'll get to that. I think I'm going to give up trying not to say so. It's just something I do, and I'll have to live with it. All right, got that. And I'm going to take this raw umber into this. There's some indigo blue over here. Don't have it's not dark enough. Now it's too cool. I'm going to use raw umber. See if that works. I'm just going to go straight raw umber. That seems to work a bit better. I'm going to have to hit a highlight in the hair right above this little shadow under his lip. Let's see if we can get sort of some of the tones that are correct. I'm going to take this tone up here too. Pull it in here. I'll pull that alizarin crimson into it. I'm going to drag his lip out. That's probably what needs to happen. And then I'm going to reshape his lip a bit. Like that. That seems to kind of work. Let's now pull this tone over here, right into the corner of his mouth. Like that. And then I'm going to take this raw umber, that bluish tone, and help define the shadow under. There's a musculature under his lip right there too. All right. I'm going to use this raw umber tone, and I'm going to darken up some of his beard right here. I'm going to end up pulling some of this down. I think his chin needs to be a little bit more down this way. Then I'm going to take this lighter color and start hitting the highlights in his beard hair that is on the top of his chin. So, like I said, his chin still has a form underneath his hair, and this hair follows the form of his chin. He doesn't have like a really big flowing beard. In that case, it would have its own form and shape. It'll still be dependent on the underlying form of his chin, but you won't see such a close relationship between the forms of his chin and the shape of his beard if he had a long flowing beard. It's kind of like up in the hair. The hair is still obviously on a skull, but the bigger and more voluminous the hair is, the more it has its own independent shapes and forms. So it's got to look like a volume of hair that's on top of a volume of a skull, and so forth and so on. I'm going to continue to just noodle with this. So that it looks like hair on top of a chin. That's the goal. I'm going to take some Naples yellow, mix it in here and lighten this up. And I want to highlight some of that, I think. So I'm going to use yellow ochre and Naples yellow. I'm going to see what that does. I think that's going to work. There's a highlight on that side of his face. I'm going to dip into some Portland gray light, which is the closest thing I have to white on the palette here. And I'm just going to hit a highlight on his nose. So it's too thick, and I'm trying to. So what happens when you try to put a thicker mixture onto a thinner mixture is it won't stick if it's still wet. So thin it down a little bit. Now, when you're putting in a highlight like this, there's an angle. It's not just a dot. There's an angle that even that little dot is on a plane of the nose. So you want to make sure that that dot is describing the form. And then there's some more. I'm not going to go that light with it. So I'm going to do the same sort of things along the ridge of his nose and under his eye. But if they're all the same brightness as that highlight, it's going to be in the same leave some space and it's going to flatten out. So what I'm doing is I'm darkening that tone just a bit. And I think I mentioned before that painting, figurative paintings, is borrowing from the same principles, excuse me, as landscape painting, in the sense that things that are closer to you tend to be darker. I mean, shadows, and there's more contrast in dark and light and closer to you than they are farther away. Things that are closer to you are generally more chromatic value. They're brighter intensity, and so while those things are very much more extreme than a landscape painting, for example, like if you're looking at a foggy day, things in the far background are way more obscured than they are up front. That same idea applies to painting faces. It's just a bit more subtle, but you can push those things to get the effect of space in the painting. And I did some of that here by coloring in his nose really dark, so that darker tone looks like it's popping off of his face compared to his cheekbone and everything else. So it looks closer to us. And you might not always see that sort of relationship in references, but when you understand that that will make it work that way, that's what I mean by not getting too committed to the references that you're using. I don't think I got that in the right spot. Let me so yeah, it's dry underneath. Let me so I just wipe. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put the mark in the right spot, I think, and I'm going to come back with a tone, and I think I'm going to use a raw umber mixture, and I'm going to come in and working. I'm going to do a yellow ochre and raw umber more. Let me gray that up a little bit. All right. I need to, looks like part of his nose is over. All right, I think I know what I need to do. Grab some raw umber, some of this cadmium red light mixture. Just darken that up right there. That looks decent. Do it like that. See how that looks. All right, now there's a reflected light underneath this nostril over here. So it's not a whole lot of difference in tone and value, just enough. That might not be. Let me get a little bit of this medium, mix it back into this. Go here. All right, now I can see that I need to bring his mustache and beard stuff up this way a little bit. And then some of his flesh tone will be peeking out because he doesn't have like I said, he doesn't have a full beard. So some of this flesh tone is going to be peeking out around, different areas of his face. So we can come and take these tones and basically paint them out. This is similar to a landscape painting technique. When I was painting trees, I would instead of painting this, like a bunch of leaves or a bunches of, you see a bunch of leaves together. So instead of trying to paint little clumps of things, I'd paint one big shape and that would go in color of the sky peeking through and just paint that on top of it. And it would look like sky peeking through. And I'm taking the same idea to facial hair. So I want a little bit more of this alizarin crimson. Cadmium red light. Then where his facial hair and his skin tone and his beard all meet together can be sort of blended that way, so that they like stipple together, they crosshatch, and it looks like facial hair. At the same time, it looks like skin coming through. Now we have more of an even tone of transition from his face to his beard. He has like salt and pepper beard too. So I'm going to continue to try to emulate that with little marks, scumbling things together. What I mean by scumbling is I'm just pushing, dragging around, pushing and pulling. Not really trying to create a shape or just much of anything. Just really rough patch it in. I'm gonna bring that up to his hairline. That. I think I really want to emphasize the shadow over here on his other side of his face. I'm gonna pull some burnt sienna, mix it back into this whatever color I have here. I think it's gonna be dark enough. Let's go a little more bold with that. I think I see what I need to do. It needs to be a better highlight over here. So I'm going to go back to this tone, which is actually the same tone I have over here, but it's going to look more like a highlight over here. There's that right there, and then a little bit darker, there's another little shape there. Not quite right. Like that right there. That looks pretty good from a distance. My paintings look good from far away. Really far away sometimes. I'm not quite getting that dark enough. I want it darker. Go in some raw umber right there. Then some yellow ochre. See if that does the trick. There we go, maybe? Yeah, doesn't matter. Looking right. I'm gonna push this highlight up here a little bit more. This is on the side of his face, not on his nose. It's affecting his nose, so it's going to. Right now, if I hit a highlight right here on the rim of his nose, kind of have it started there, but not quite enough. There's a lot of other details this that are going to be like blood splatters on his face. So let's not get confused by those quite yet. And this also turns into a reflected light that goes up under his eye over here. There we go. And I'm going to put in some highlights over here. I want to hit the highlights on this side of his eye and his face. I'm going to go with a more of a Naples yellow over here. It's going to look a lot brighter. Then I'm going to continue that over here. And so this is more of a wet into wet. This color has been mixing in with some of these tones that are already here. So hopefully it ends up shifting enough that it doesn't look all the same. That is not right. Now let's go back with some this nose color. Whatever that is. Way too bright. All right. And then that color, I'm going to bring it back down into his lip too. But just right there, and maybe like a little dash there. And I'm going to mix that with some raw umber to hit some of these highlights up over here. Let's mix some more Naples yellow in that. The Naples yellow isn't really yellow, it's kind of a grayish earth tone. It's got a yellow sort of tint to it, but it doesn't really work like a true Naples yellow doesn't really work like a yellow. It doesn't make everything green when you mix it with blue really immediately. And then I'm going to mix the yellow ochre up to, this might be too bright, so I'm going to take this yellow ochre with these Portland grays. I think that's going to work well for the highlight on his jacket. We don't want the jacket competing for attention with and it looks like this sort of fabricy, like, I don't know what you call this. It's soft and plush like that. So we can use the brush to sort of imitate that texture. See how that works over here. Actually go with a more of a gray, see how that works. It's all right. I think this part of his eyelid is going to be a little different. Doesn't look quite right. Going to just reshape that a bit. That looks a little better. All right, now we can go back over here and we're warmed up a bit and retackle his ear a little bit, try to make it look like it was all painted together for the same painting. Or not, maybe. I don't know. I think now it's a good time to maybe hit some highlights and structures in his hair. I'm going to go back to a flat brush. Going to, looks like I used a indigo blue and raw umber. So I'm going to, a indigo blue and burnt umber. I'm going to pull some raw umber over here. I'm going to thin it up a little bit. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to pull some yellow ochre into it. That's going to give us, so the raw umber is a kind of a greenish brown, and this yellow ochre is, well, it's a yellow, but it's not a real strong yellow. So it's going to give us sort of a yellowish, muddy green color. And I just want to see how that looks. His hair's got these strands on it. So what we want to do is start making brush strokes that describe the strokes of his hair. And I'm going to contrast that with the raw umber in indigo blue. And that's going to hopefully give us a kind of a contrast of warm and cool tones. And then we can then use all these brush strokes to, like I was mentioning before, describe the way his hair is flowing over his skull. And it looks like this is going to be lighter in the backside. Again, if you're thinking of it in terms of creating space as a landscape painting, we want things that are going away from us to recede in space. So I'm going to make them look closer to the tones and temperatures of the background. Just better describe the shape of his ear here. And then he's got some light that's on the top of his head. The same light that's hitting the side of his face is also hitting his hair over here. We're going, and his hair is really messy. I'm just gonna highlight. I might actually lighten that up a little bit more. And what I'm gonna lighten it up with is this yellow ochre. I'm not gonna dip into these other colors quite yet. I think that's going to work for looking like lightened up hair. Okay. And now comes the interesting part. I'm gonna use the same tone to just dab in some colors over here, highlights, whatnot. I'm actually going to use more of this gray tone, this gray. See if that works. Kind of. All right. The tricky part. He has all kinds of strands of hair coming down into his face. I'm going to start this raw umber mixture with a little bit of indigo blue. So it looks like he's going to have a strand of hair coming down here. So let's do this. I'm going to change the tones of these colors as I go, as it works its way down. So I'm taking a straight raw umber, putting it up there to see how it looks. I'm going to take this indigo blue, do it like that. And where it's thicker, it's going to have more of the indigo blue. And then where his hair is thinner, I think it's going to have a little bit more of this burnt umber. And I think that the interplay of warm and cool dark tone is going to help it look like it's getting thinner and make it look more like hair. And you don't have to worry about getting this exact if you're using reference. You just using it as a reference. So it's not exact, it doesn't really matter. So one thing to keep in mind is his hair is also going to have cast shadows onto his face. So we're going to worry about that in a bit. But keep in mind as you're doing this that, especially if you're looking at reference, not everything that you're looking at is that, you know, all these little marks aren't going to be hair. Some of them are going to be other things, shadows, and such. Now, if you're nervous about this, I would suggest giving it a day and waiting for the paint to dry before you start going in and painting over this. Because as you can see, some of the paint is just scumbling, scratching out the painting, part of the painting we already did. If you don't want that, it's best to you can wait for it to dry and then work up this sort of thing over top of it. And if you don't like it, you can then wipe it out. But I like to go gonzo on this. Sometimes you can get those flesh tones mixing in, and that actually works. There's not any real way that you should do it. But I like to work quickly through these things. Come back and worry about things later. Remember, he's got like straight, scraggly hairs. This is also a good example, like what I was talking about before with the brush. So I'm using a flat brush, and as you can see, I can get all kinds of variations in my brush strokes and create these hair-like textures. Work through this. You can do this with a thin round brush if you want to, if that's what you're more comfortable with. There's, in fact, some of the thinner hair strands that might be advisable on it. You'll want to get it look a little better. Go into some detail on the hair, make it look, like you really want to focus on the gracefulness of his hair. Now, I think I will wait to go and do some of the, like the shadows from his hair later. It's going to be more involved and take my time with that. But I really kind of wanted to show you how to, or at least see if I could show you how to nail this down. Okay, I want to go back into this part where I was talking about painting it as if it were a tree. And instead of painting all the strands of hair popping out, I'm going to paint some of the background out of it. So it looks like I had a mixture of indigo blue. See if I can find it. Well, it was a mixture of indigo blue and these colors, so I'm just going to go right into this. Just mix some yellow ochre with it. I think that's what I was doing. I had to guess. It's fairly close to it. I'm going to pick up some of this gray. I think. Maybe a little bit of this more umber. So as you see, I mix all the color on my palette, and then I'll mix other colors and I'll mix things around it. You can use a palette knife for that, but I'm lazy. All right. So let's make it look like he has strands of hair in here by painting out stuff like this. So I'm painting the background out of his hair rather than painting all the strands of his hair. And this may work in some areas, it may not work in others. I'm probably going to go and reduce some of the strands that he has here. But I wanted to give you an idea of what I mean. I'm painting out the highlights like that. So that's how that works. And I'm going to take a tone. I think this is the color I was using for that part of his hair. And let's just mix up a little bit more paint here. Having a variation of darker tones and cooler tones, and you'll kind of push and pull with this a bit till you find what works the best, like what's describing the form of his hair over his head. And a lot of this is going to be more temperature changes of color than it is how light or dark it is. All right. So remember that ultimately this has to describe his shape of his head first. And hair's kind of fun. It's kind of like trees. You can get loose with it. Trees are a little bit easier because there's no real rigid anatomical structure from one tree to the next. So you can get away with a lot more just pushing things around. And I'm going to hit some highlights on some of his hair over here. I'm going to do that with mixture of raw umber and Naples yellow. Let's see if that works. I'm going to go in this yellow ochre, pick up some of that. So his hair looks like it's wet. Little highlights here and there on it. Don't necessarily want to go too crazy on that. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of distracting. A few things here and there. And I think I'm going to put it on pause for a bit. I'm going to come back to this with another video. I'm going to end up going. Actually, no, yeah, I'm going to come back and do highlights on his face, and not highlights. I mean, what I mean is I'm going to do some details of blood splatter and shadows from his hair and some other things. Probably on another video. It'll be a little bit shorter. So we're going to stop it there for right now. All right.